So I'm here with Megan Preston-Meyer, and we will talk about Firebrand, writing books, MBAs, and much more. But I don't want to take this too far. Why don't you just introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Emil. First of all, I'm glad to be here. I'm Megan Preston-Meyer, and I spent about a decade in the corporate world. I did get an MBA, guilty as charged. And now, for the last 5 years, I've been writing books. So I've got my first novel is out, Firebrand. It's about a girl who gets her MBA and her first big corporate job and then has to solve a mystery. And I also write kids' books about supply chain management. I've got a forthcoming book. It'll come out in the next month or so as well that kind of spans the two worlds. It's for both adults and kids. So that's so I guess if I had to sum it up in one word, I'm an author.
So first thing, obviously, is what I talk about most often because I'm just curious about changing your life's path. And how did you get from pursuing a pretty straightforward getting an MBA and being in the corporate world, like a ready set career path? How did you venture out and deciding and becoming an author?
If you had asked me when I was 8 years old what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said an author. But an author wasn't a thing you could just be. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go, I'll do sort of the more societally accepted path. So I got a degree and then I got another degree and actually started a PhD and then decided I wasn't going to go into academia and got back out into the real world and worked for a while. And things were fine. I enjoyed the corporate life as much as anyone does. But at some point I realized I was always writing on the side. It was always a hobby. And then I just decided I was getting more and more into the analytics side of the world. So I started in supply chain, moved more towards analytics. And then I realized what I enjoyed about analytics wasn't so much the kind of the technical side or the number side, but it was communicating the results and the insights and the fruits of the analysis. And so I thought I was sort of at a point in my career where I either needed to either get even more techie and kind of delve into the data science world, because that was kind of back in the days when data scientist was the sexiest job on earth.
Yeah.
And so either I could be more techie, I could be more managerial, or I could just do neither. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this writing thing that has always been in the back of my mind. And I set it up so that I would take 1 year off. I would take 1 year to become a writer, to see if I could become a writer. And I figured at the end of 1 year, my CV wouldn't have taken too much of a hit. I could always get back into the corporate life without having fallen off the ladder too much. And so I did it. I decided in early 2020, right before everybody sort of changed directions. I decided I was going to give myself 1 year, and I so far haven't looked back.
Thanks for sharing this. Is there anything that influenced you in this kind of decision, or was it just like inherent inside of you that you just want to try? Because I have seen so many, not directly similar, but I've read so much about sabbaticals and taking off and pathless career things. And did anything of this kind of influence you in a way, or how did you get?
I remember having a conversation with one of my colleagues, and he was the type of guy who had a spreadsheet for everything. And he was tracking his net worth and could tell you down to the day when he would be able to retire. And I think as part of that conversation, I thought, why would you whether it's 55 or even 45, if you're this focused on when you can stop working, why wouldn't you just take, a year or 5 years right now and then work a little bit longer later? And so I think that might have actually been one of the, that might have been one of the seeds that sort of led into this decision. And then another one was that I had gotten to the point where I had been working long enough that I could extrapolate from the trend that I had seen. Like the decade I had been working was probably going to look like the next decade, which would probably look like the following decade. And like I said before, it was fine, but it wasn't great. It wasn't what I really wanted to do. And so I thought, well, why settle for mediocrity?
Definitely. These personal conversations about retirement and how limited our time is on Earth makes it really seem what you do in the present moment. And I see this as a common pattern with almost anyone who kind of wants to build something else than just a stable career. And that's a pretty bold move, and I'm glad you did it. I got to read Firebrand. Not that much of the children's book, but you started with the children's books, right?
Yep, the children's books. I think I published 2 of them before Firebrand and 1 of them after. But a children's book is 24 pages as opposed to 300, so it's a little easier to churn those out than the novel.
Definitely, in case of the subject matter, but I think it's still a complicated thing to do, to have like this complex topic. And was it supply chain management, right? And even kind of recognizing the topic alone, how did you manage to kind of communicate such a complex topic for children? And the other thing is, do they understand it if they read it or get it read?
To answer the second question first, I think they do. And I've gotten feedback and reviews, and I've heard anecdotes of kids who are reading the books and then putting the topics, kind of the concepts, to use in either the exact same context or in different contexts. And I think, so to sort of go back to the first question, this is one of the things that I've been good at, and I really enjoy doing, is taking complex topics and trying to distill them down to the very essence and make them easy and understandable and fun as far as that is possible. I mean, not every complex topic can be fun, but a lot of them can be. And so with supply chain management, operations management, logistics, these are concepts that they're actually quite concrete. So the kids' books, I mean, I know there are kids' books out there that are trying to tackle much more complex or abstractly complex topics. And those I have great respect for. Thinking about putting together a book on philosophy. So we'll see if that ever comes to fruition. But supply chain and logistics, I mean, you're literally talking about moving things from point A to point B. It's very tangible. Yeah. And so if you can get that if you can take these concepts into a context that kids know or can imagine, so something a little more close to home, then they are very, like, they're easy to understand because a kid can not only read about it in a book, but then go see it in real life. So for instance, the first kids book is called FIFO Saves the Day. And it's about the concept of first in, first out. So it's, if you've got eggs or groceries or perishable inventory, you have to rotate the stock so that the first sort of the thing closest to you on the shelf as a consumer, you grab the carton of milk because that expires first.
Yeah.
And then you put the fresher stuff in the back. And kids can see this if they go to the grocery store. They can see this in their own, in their own kitchens. And I mean, the book teaches it using dragons and eggs, and it puts a little bit more fantasy and fun around it. But I've heard from readers, from parents of readers, that after reading FIFO Saves the Day, their kids now want to eat leftovers because they understand the concept. And so to me, that's the greatest. I can get 1 million Amazon reviews with 5 stars, but hearing one kid who's now going to eat leftovers, that's the best that I could ask for.
Yeah, definitely. And I can totally imagine this image in my mind right now. Being as a kid and having to eat leftovers, you'll never be excited, except if you kind of make it special enough. And understanding the concept, why it is important, without just strictly tell them to do this because you need to do. I think children want to have explanations they can understand, and not just because I've said so. And this is definitely a good part. And this kind of made me curious about even still getting into the FIFO books and try and read them seriously enough, because I'm on the other side, tend to make simple things too complex instead of the other way around, and try to get to the philosophy of things that don't really matter in real life. That's cool. So the FIFO books are available on your Gumroad store, and anywhere are they else?
They're also on Amazon, especially in the US. I think they're available in other markets on Amazon as well. But the best place is www.supply-jane.com. And I actually, since I'm a publisher as well as an author, so I fulfill a lot of the orders myself, and it's much cheaper and doesn't involve Amazon if you order directly from me. So I would always recommend that route.
That was an unintentional advertising, but this is absolutely intentional for me to talk about like indie approaches and having the agency and creativity and stuff like that. Definitely have a part on this podcast, so I need to proclaim this. But let's get a bit into the Firebrand. I am honest with you, I'm so much into nonfiction books that I did not even realize that it is a novel until I read the first few things. I thought it was just like the product, that it's more like a novel. And no, this doesn't stop being a novel. And it hooked me. The story, I couldn't really identify myself with it, but it felt good reading it. And I think I'm about a third in, and will read more about. And there's something that I kind of noticed, because there are similar topics with you and like the protagonist. And so, but first off, what was the spark for you to write Firebrand? So what specific moment was it that got you into writing this book?
A lot of Firebrand, you will see a lot of similarities between me and the protagonist, because it's semi-autobiographical. I never had to solve a mystery in my corporate career, luckily. But the spark, really, I wrote most of the novel on the train going to and from work. So a lot of it was just, I would look at let's face it, some of the absurd situations that happen at work, and just the weird dynamics that we kind of force ourselves into or find ourselves into. But there's just some weird stuff that happens when you walk into an office or turn on a Zoom call, or kind of go into corporate mode. And so writing Firebrand was sort of a way for me to work through, to put a little spin on it. Cause I tried to make it humorous. I tried to make it kind of a loving look at some of the absurdities. So it's satire, but it's not mean. But so it was a way for me to work through some of these situations that I found myself in. And then at some point I realized it should have a plot too. So I stuck that in there as well.
Yeah, definitely. When writing a novel needs a plot. Instead, you will just endlessly write something. But this is what kind of emphasizes what happens really. And like you said, it kind of extrapolates at least the feelings you have on some of these weird situations that emerge in like corporate situations. And you have your MBA yourself, just like Corinne. And how much of this, as you said, it's semi-autobiographic, and how much of the struggle are really felt by yourself in the same way? Or let me say, what are the biggest differences between you and Corinne?
That's a good question. The biggest differences, I think, are that my character arc is a little more developed than Current's. So at least in the first book, because this is the first in a series, I've gotten over a little bit more of my imposter syndrome in my life. Current is still kind of smack dab in the middle of it. She's working her way through it. But I think that's probably the biggest difference is, I mean, in a lot of ways, Current is me of 10, 15 years ago. And I tried to make that struggle, because we all feel impostery no matter what we're doing. But we also, I think a lot of us kind of vacillate between, the super low point of, I have no idea what I'm doing. Everyone's going to know I'm a fraud. But then also these peaks of like, I've got it all figured out. Like, I know everything. Why are these people around me so stupid? And that's another one of those really interesting dynamics that we find ourselves in, or at least I found myself in. I don't know how universal this is. I hope it's universal so that people find themselves in the book. But I think and Current is, I want to say that she's similar to me in all of the good ways and dissimilar to me in the negative ways, but I don't think that's very true. I think anytime you're writing a character, you're putting yourself into it, and you don't really know, it's not completely conscious, like which elements you're putting in and which you're making up.
Yeah, definitely. You need to make this kind of more like a caricature of yourself to kind of enhance the good parts and the bad parts. And in reality, it's all a bit more nuanced than it is in a fictional work. But this makes this a bit more vivid, and you feel yourself. You need to put a lot of more picturesque emotions into a book, because it's just words. You can't feel it. You can see it. You just need to describe it in a bit more than it is in a reality. One thing is the clash that Current, the protagonist, has about getting into the corporate world. Do you think generally, not just in the book but also in real life, is the contrast between studying and pursuing an MBA and then getting into a corporate world with all its real and fictional mysteries? Why do you think the contrast is so hard?
I think the contrast is hard because the real world is the real world, and studying is always theoretical. It has to have, you have to take this step back. You have to abstract things into into general concepts so that you can teach them. I mean, you can teach people strategy. You can have an MBA strategy class and teach people Porter's 5 forces and some of these like frameworks.
Yeah.
But when you go into an actual job, there are actual people. You're in an actual business. There are all of the intricacies and the specifics of that particular situation. And you have to make a decision based on what is really happening at that time in that place. And so much of what studying does, whether it's an MBA, whether it's, basically any sort of education, is that it's giving you guidelines. It's giving you, hypotheticals. What would you do in this situation?
Yeah.
Which is trying to get you ready for that actual situation. But it's almost, especially in business school, they use case studies a lot, where you're given some information and then you're asked, what would you do in this situation? And then you're graded, and the success is usually graded on how creative you are with kind of bringing in other information. So you're basically making something up and saying, well, here's what I would do. I would ask this fictional person this fictional question, and I would probably get, like, you can even sort of say, here's the fictional response I would get, and therefore I would make this decision. So there's all of these assumptions. And the more assumptions you can lay down, then, the more you can constrain your decision space, and you can come up with something that sounds very, very good for this hypothetical question.
Yep.
But in the real world, there aren't any hypotheticals anymore. It's all just there. Like, you are given a set of facts and you have to make a decision within those facts. And that's a lot harder. And it's also a completely different skill set, because if you've been trained for however many years to go in and lay out assumptions that don't actually exist, then when you don't get to lay out assumptions, then you're kind of at a loss.
Yeah. You need to assume a lot of things, and you have a lot of frameworks and strategies that you learn. And most of it in real businesses, or is even exercised some kind in a corporate in comparison to like a small business. And a lot of the theoretical stuff and how things should be like, or should be decided about, have so many factors, so many hidden politics, power, role, status games, dynamics, perception, miscommunication. There's so many things that are not considered in these case studies. And
right.
And your own biases kind of make up even another filter when it goes to making a decision without having real facts. And real business and real corporate world involves making decisions without having sufficient information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is that if you're being hypothetical, if you're doing a case study, the result is the answer, right? It's like, here's what I would do. And, and in most cases, that's not, like, you don't stop there. That's the starting point in real life. You also, so the kind of the answer you come up with then needs to be implemented. And that's going to be, you might have an idea that looks good on paper or kind of objectively would be the right answer. But if there's no way you're going to actually be able to do it, then it's not the right answer. And that's a whole level of reality that you don't see in school very often.
Yeah. And implementing is really where it's getting interesting. And just to plan with this is what I would do, and just implying that you can implement it straightforward with no barriers, like, here's a plan that is now the new reality, and that's the plan. You have forces against it. Maybe you have a plan. You need to allocate the resources and how to do this. I recently had the chance to be guest in a defending of a bachelor's thesis from my colleague students, friends, and they kind of also had the thing about like sustainable development frameworks and how they are implemented in real life, in real businesses. What are they actually doing? And a lot of them are taught in their studies, but almost zero of their interview partners actually used them. And it has a big role in how their like sustainable manager, how important their role is, or if they just have someone who's in charge for responsibility, but has almost zero influence or power to change anything. So this instantly came up into my mind when talking about implementing. Even if you have a great idea, it is not a guarantee for implementing. And the next question I kind of want to transition to is like, one theme in the book is also like changing the system or challenging the system as she kind of wants to solve this mystery. And how much do you think being a good employee and following the rules and being just straight up a good workforce and pushing against the system, where do you personally fall into the spectrum? More of being like a good employee and doing what you're told and being accurate in your work, or being a bit more challenging to the system?
I would like to be able to say that I stand up for what I believe in. And if I see something going wrong, I'm the first to call people out on it and challenge everybody. And I mean, there have been points in my career where I've done that, points in my life when I've done that.
Yep.
I think one of the things that's frustrating about the corporate world is that I don't want to say impossible, but I mean, one of the reasons that I sort of opted out of that whole environment is because even if you did see something going really, really wrong, even if you did have the courage to stand up for it, that doesn't mean that it's going to, there's oftentimes very little hope that things will change. And that's not because of any particular person. That's more because of just the way the structures are. People might, I don't know, you can talk to your manager, you can talk to the CEO, you can be, if you're an activist investor, that might be a little bit different. But I think one of the very most frustrating things about environments like some large organizations is that everybody sees and agrees that things aren't going in the right direction, but everyone is helpless or feels helpless to stop it. And whether that's because the responsibility is so diluted that no single person really has the power to change, the organization doesn't have any desire to change, whatever it is. So I find that, I think, so to get back to your original question, where on the spectrum am I? I'm just not on that spectrum anymore. I just decided I get very frustrated when I see things going wrong that I can't fix. And this is probably not the best reaction, but I tend to then just, I give it a shot. And then if it doesn't work, then I jump ship and kind of just give up.
Yeah. Sometimes giving up needs to be seen as another perspective. I've read the buzzword almost pivoting. So taking the pivot and just doing something else, or strategically giving up, because giving up, the term has such a negative connotation. So you almost feel guilty for anything you stop, even if it might be the right decision to stop something. And obviously you have been writing on the side when you were still in your corporate job, and sort of as your creative output and outlet. How do you think is the best way, or what do you think is the best way to kind of survive a corporate job when it comes to, if you're a creative person but you are stuck in a job and don't feel the courage or not in a situation to kind of quit it right away?
I think having your creative outlet on the side is one of the best ways to survive in that case, because it gives you an escape and it gives you an outlet to, to not only to get your mind off of work, but to work your way through some of the things that you're experiencing as well. And like I said, I loved having my train commute. That was, I think especially because it was the commute. It was before work, it was after work. And so it was that was my transition between kind of the work world and the rest of the world. And so it was a very nice little liminal space where I could kind of be in both at the same time. And then by the time I got home, I was usually a little bit, then I was ready for the rest of the day. So I would say use your commute time to be creative as much as that is possible.
Yeah, definitely. I think the commute time, especially when it's in a train ride, has something where you can focus on writing. It's definitely, it should be obvious that you cannot write a novel while driving a car, or at least maybe a transcript. But writing is something you can do when you sit down, have your mind focused on it. And the commute time and the transition to work definitely makes a difference. What is it about when you kind of have a remote job? And did you work in, obviously, the COVID-19 situation where you had to probably also work in remote environments? How did this affect your work when you haven't had the time to commute?
So I quit my last job, my last corporate job. I think I gave notice, and then all of the lockdowns came in like the week after I gave notice. In Switzerland, we have like a 3-month notice period. So It was right at the end. So I worked for about maybe 2 months remotely before I was on my own. And so that was at the same time that everyone was getting used to working from home. Yep. And so I was trying to figure out how to do this writing thing remotely anyway. I knew I would not have an office. I knew I would just kind of always be at home in my, in my home office. And so without a commute, I mean, there are different times during the day that you can use. And I think some of that, if you're a morning person, there used to be, I don't know if there still is because I stopped doing it, but a hashtag on Twitter called 5 a.m. Writers Club. And so I did that for a little while, where I would get up and I would write kind of, maybe not write at 5 a.m., but pretty close, and then write for an hour or two before going to, work, I say with quotation marks.
Yep.
And then, so if you're a morning person, there's that. If you're an evening person, there's the kind of the time, find a slot then. I'm big into lunch hours, and I work on my own. I set my own schedule, but I still kind of, I take time between usually noon and 2 p.m. to I work out, I eat lunch, that's my downtime. And so, and that's when I'm doing things that now my job is writing, but being an indie author and publisher, I write, that is kind of the minority of the time spent. Most of the time I'm doing marketing and a zillion other things. But so actually that space either in the morning or around lunchtime is when I'm more creative than the rest of the day.
I've seen it the other way around. I can't really pinpoint where I'm the most creative, but I try to, as I'm writing a book as well, try to find a perfect time. I think that I'm just more like creative, productive. If you put this together in like the morning time, and just where I'm more creative and less productive is the later it gets. I kind of have late or almost late night, and we're just having just a single word that pops up into my mind. I need to kind of get my head around and think, why haven't I thought about this before? It's just so crucial. But a single word doesn't replace like finishing a paragraph or something. Or the level of productivity is definitely higher in the mornings. And it is so hard to get a routine into something that is creative, and writing definitely counts as this, especially when you kind of transition from writing on the side with no pressure at all to have a full-time profession. It's harder when you kind of have to publish and have to pursue and have to write in order to have something to publish.
It is, but it's also, I've found that like constraints help me with creativity. And so when I was writing when I knew I had like 35 minutes on the train twice a day to write, I would use all of that time, and I would be, I would guard it very jealously, and I was so productive during that time. And there were a couple times I actually almost missed my stop.
Yeah.
But now that, then I was like, well, if I can work that hard in, kind of on the edges of my day, now that I've got the entire day to write, I will be so productive. And that is not the case, at least all the time. Like it's very Parkinson's law. If I think, well, I've got all morning to, write this chapter, then I will do anything except sitting down to write that chapter. And so I try to structure my day with where I've got a lot of little more mindless tasks, and in between I have these little blocks of time, and then I can use those to actually write. And there's still a little bit of time pressure, so that I actually do something instead of just, kind of sitting and thinking all day. Because like you said, thinking is important, but thinking doesn't get the book done.
Yeah. It's so hard to notice this, and I'm starting pretty young with this kind of experience that thinking doesn't get anything done, which is kind of my creative transformation, so to speak, that you cannot guard yourself as a creative person if you have no output whatsoever. But the other thing that I'm curious about, how do you manage distraction?
That's a very good question. I do a lot with the Pomodoro method, which is the 25 minutes of focus, and then 5 or 10 minutes, or, however long you want to take in between there. But once I can get myself started, then I can get focused pretty easily. And I found that one way to sort of trick myself into getting focused is to say, I'm only going to do 25 minutes. Even if I only do 25 minutes today, that will be enough. And, I don't want to say 9 times out of 10, the 25 minutes is up and I just keep writing. It's maybe 3 times out of 10, but at least I've done 25 minutes. And so, this is, now I'm kind of hearing myself say this out loud. I think I have to trick myself into doing things with small blocks of time. I tricked myself into quitting my job to become an author by saying it would only be a year, and then I can go back to the corporate world if I want. I trick myself into writing by saying I only have to write for 25 minutes, and then I can go back and, I don't know, make a social media post on Canva for the rest of the day or whatever, else I'm using my time for. But these finding ways to get started, I think for most of us who are creative, we're writing or we're painting or we're creating because we love doing it. And we forget, or at least I forget every single day, multiple times a day, how much I like to write. And so I have to trick myself into getting back into it. And then once I'm there, I'm fine.
Yeah. I can identify myself with this. And I think one thing I noticed is that as humans, we are typically risk averse, and you would probably see this as yourself when working in like analytics. We're risk averse and cannot focus ourselves and getting into a huge gap if it's in work or even it's starting a task. I'm putting off everything that I'm not sure how long it takes, and keep on going when I know I can stop in 5 minutes and it's okay. But definitely having to trick yourself and to kind of pursue the craft you want to have, you want to do. And sometimes it is like that you're sitting on front of whatever you're writing with and having a hard time to focus and start and getting into, especially when writing, because it's so complex. I think it's something else in it really depends on the creative pursuit. When I have some paintings I've did, and I don't have any prompt, I just start with whatever I want to paint, and I have no structure. And in writing, it's something else. The sentences have to make sense, and multiple sentences need to make up a paragraph that kind of is coherent. And sometimes I read them over and over and think they're just okay enough, which kind of gets me into the next question is, how do you decide if something is good enough when do you decide something is done?
That's such a difficult question, and it changes from piece to piece, I guess. I mean, a book is never done, will never be done. And so at some point, at least for me, I have to set a deadline. I have to just say, like, on this day, the book is going to be either published or, there's usually interim steps in there. It's going to, a reader or a proofreader, or, I mean, like, the PDF is finished. I'm not going to format it anymore. So I have to give myself a calendar date, and then it's kind of running up against the clock, and, we'll see, because I think most of us, I mean, it's done so long before we think it's done, or it's good enough. Because one thing I have to constantly remind myself is that anything that we put out in the world, whether it's a book, whether it's a painting, whether it's a poem, whether it's an email newsletter, it's not ours once it's out there anymore. And it's not, unless it's like a journal entry, the reader needs to find themselves in it. There has to be space enough for the reader to find themselves in it, space enough for the viewer to find themselves in the painting. And so if we finish it, if we tie off every little bow, if we make everything too perfect and too closed, there's no room for anybody else. And I try to remind myself that, especially when I'm into the point of like, okay, do I want to switching one word out of a, 50,000 word novel, switching this back and forth, or should this be in italics and should it not? Like, at some point, those things don't matter. It's the whole that matters, and the whole is done.
Yeah, definitely. The italics and quotation marks thing, and what should be like bold, and this is so unimportant. I just need to stick to like one format and not mix them all together. But you're right. Having a deadline is absolutely needed to kind of finish a project. And as I said before, without publishing, without sharing into the world, your creative work is basically nothing. That is my realization. It is worth nothing because it's not out there in the world for others to see. And I think that is really the beauty of art, is to be seen and not to be hidden. And it's a good thing. And I would need to set up a deadline for my book as well. I just said last year when I started, I just said 2025. And this is could be any time. It could be just like New Year's Eve even. But I need to kind of have a deadline and stop forming around. And one metaphor I had that is similar to yours is kind of not in the perspective of the people seeing and kind of imagining what they're reading and identifying themselves, but when it comes to like perfection, is if you imagine like a marble block and you have like the statue of David, and you need to carve out a lot until it is the art, until you can see the beauty, and nothing more than that. If you constantly kind of move around more marble, it just becomes a blob or something bland. It is indistinguishable. There's no corners, no edges to be seen, and it makes sense that you cannot polish your work until it's nothing.
Yeah.
So I need to check my notes here and to see where I was heading, but I liked to have the conversation flowing. Yeah. When writing a book, you said you will write a sequel or even more books on your Firebrand books. And the first thing, I think it's kind of, for me, it's a bit more difficult to talk about a novel or a fiction book because I don't want to spoiler. And this is not a thing that I would have to consider in talking about a nonfiction book. There's no spoiler there. The ideas are to be talked about, but I don't want to talk about too much. I just want to say she solves a mystery. And do you know where she's going next after she's done that?
I do. So actually, because Current is sort of like me and just on a slightly delayed time frame, the next book that I'm working on right now, actually, Current's company is going to be merging with the company, actually a German company. And so she has to go and investigate. There will also be a mystery involved. And so she will go on her first big business trip to Germany and will end up investigating some questionable practices there. And I'm not trying to, I'm not hedging here because I'm trying to not give away spoilers. I just don't completely have everything.
That's totally fine. As a German, one detail that is absolutely not really crucial, but do you know where in Germany she's going?
She's going to Ravensburg, and then there may or may not be something going on with the Bodensee. So this is the kind of the geography that she'll be involved with, and part of that is because she's also going to meet a love interest in the second book, and he's from Switzerland. And so I had to find a place in Germany where it would make sense for them to fly into the Zurich airport to get there.
Yeah.
So, again, constraints equal creativity. So.
Yeah. Makes sense. The Bodensee is pretty far. Not that far. I mean, pretty close to Switzerland. And I kind of think the whole setting is kind of, in lack of a better word, it's just cute, and having like the alpine chalet coffee and stuff like that, and it makes sense with what's with Switzerland and stuff. How long have you been living in Switzerland?
I've been here for 12 years now.
So you're from the US?
I'm from the US. I'm from Minnesota originally.
Current is from Minnesota as well, right?
Yes,
yeah.
She is.
Coincidence, probably. So
funny how that worked out. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you got to Switzerland for the corporate job you have been pursuing before, or what was the reason you got into Switzerland?
No, it's whenever I meet expats, we always agree it's either love or money. Yeah. And so mine was love. I married or I met a Swiss guy in Minnesota, and then we got married and moved over here. So
okay. So what is his opinion on Swiss Miss hot chocolate?
I don't think he likes it very much. He, especially now, because we are kind of every stereotype about Switzerland, especially about the chocolate eating. I saw a chart the other day that says, I think per capita, Switzerland eats something like 11.3 kilos of chocolate a year. And we absolutely, we are up there. We're probably on the higher end, bringing up some of those non-chocolate eaters to, to get to that average. But we have 100% cacao powder, and we don't, none of that kind of milk powder, sugar, a little bit of chocolate sprinkled in. If we're going to make hot chocolate, it's going to be real chocolate.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, and to kind of wrap this up, because before this comes too much about chocolate and Swiss stereotypes, do you think you could ever go back into corporate life in some sort of way, or to work in another kind of business, or start a startup or something like that?
What I would love to do is, some people want to take sabbaticals, from their corporate job to write a book. And I want to do the opposite now. I realized I've been out on my own writing for 5 years now, and I'm running out of material. And so I would love to find a way to just take a sabbatical and go back and work for, a couple of months here or there, do some consulting or some project work, just to restock the kind of my treasury of corporate anecdotes. And so that's something that I'm, and I do some communications consulting, and I do some little projects here and there, but I don't ever see myself, knock on wood, as long as it's financially feasible, going back and being on someone's payroll full time. I like being my own boss. I like setting my own schedule, and I like having time to write and not being tied to my email inbox or my Slack messages. Yeah.
And we wouldn't probably have the time to kind of record this on a regular Thursday, on before noon, and just talk about something like this, when you were on a full-time situation. And this is what kind of fears myself the most, and not having this kind of flexibility on working on projects. It's not even the setting or something else. It's just being 8 hours a day, fixed work time, no flexibility, not real, and except for the holidays. But still, I think it's pretty cool, and I can definitely see you applying for some, or not applying, doing some consulting work and getting some information, as long as they don't think you're just investigating for your for your books, because it seems a bit sketchy then. But you're not there to solve mysteries like Current does. And to wrap this up, one last thing. Is there one thing you would say to your younger self right now in your situation?
It's funny because my younger self, I basically write about my younger self constantly. And so I'm trying to give her guidance and trying to see what she does. But I don't know. Like, and this is another one of those hypotheticals, like we were talking about in business school, where, I mean, I like who I am now. And so I don't think my younger self should change, because then who knows who I would be. And so if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would just say, like, yeah, it's not always going to be fun. It'll turn out okay. Just keep going.
It's all part of the story. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I think this will be it. I'm definitely open for another conversation and having like a follow-up episode. Maybe when your next book is out, we can have a round 2. And this will be for me. And yeah, bye. See you.
Thanks so much, Emil.
If you've enjoyed listening to my podcast, you can show support by following me and hit the bell to never miss out on my latest content. I'd appreciate a positive review too. You can find more of my content on www.emilruth.com. Thanks and bye for now.